Dear friends in India and abroad, listening to SW News, it is my pleasure to be with you to speak about the war on Iran, its origin, its implications. Why did President Trump join the war started by Prime Minister Netanyahu with such enthusiasm? And how Prime Minister Netanyahu was able to convince President Trump that it should be a cakewalk. And now, all that they planned have not worked out. So we have to figure out, why did the war occur? What is the current state of the war? How has the rest of the international community responded to it, India's policy, and the predicament India finds itself in? Now, coming to this war, I believe one of the important things to understand is that it's an asymmetric war. By an asymmetric war, I mean, for example, the Vietnam War. As we all know, it lasted almost 20 years. In fact, President Trump gave the exact, 19 years, X days. Now, at one point, there were over 500,000 American troops in Vietnam. And yet, what happened on the 30th of April, 1975, is not to be forgotten. On that day, the American ambassador was rescued by a helicopter which landed on the balcony of the embassy. Earlier, he had collected the flag which he had hoisted. So, clutching to the flag, he got into the helicopter. So, that was that. So, by an asymmetrical war, we mean a war where the resources, military, economic, diplomatic, are not matched between the belligerents. And in an asymmetrical war, the weaker side is not destined to lose. Now, coming to what is now going on, it's my view, of course I could be wrong, that President Trump is playing poker. He goes on claiming things which are not true. For example, the other day he said that thanks to the blockade, Iran will lose $500 million a day from not being able to export oil. Now, the price of oil at that time was about $100 a barrel. So $500 million meant Iran was exporting 5 million barrels. Well, the fact is Iran was exporting anything between 1.9 and 2.1 million barrels. So let's simplify it, 2 million barrels. Now that would mean Iran was getting $200 million. But did President Trump say $500 million? So his arithmetic is not always right, nor is his logic. Because the poker player depends for his success on, in India, we used to say the ICS poker face, project confidence, even when your cards are rather low. Now, Iran is playing chess. And as we all know, the chess game went to Europe through Iran. And the word checkmate comes from Shamat, a Persian word. Shah, S-H-A-H, the king. But there is another concern, and that is that perhaps President Trump believes that Iran also is playing poker. So look at the situation. Now, the second aspect I should like to draw your attention is the relationship between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump. As we all know, on the 28th of February, it was Netanyahu who started the attack, and Trump joined almost immediately. In fact, Secretary of State Marco Rubio had said Israel was going to attack in any case, with or without our permission. So we had to join, because once Israel attacks Iran, Iran will attack America also. Now, the last part of that logic is slightly doubtful. Anyway, so coming to the equation, let me draw your attention. President Trump arranged for a ceasefire in Gaza last year in October. It appeared that he had imposed it on Netanyahu. Correct. But as we all know, Netanyahu went on violating it. Now coming to another ceasefire, the one between Lebanon and Israel. We know the story, how Trump made the two countries to speak at the ambassadors' level. They had not spoken to each other for the last so many decades. And then the ceasefire was announced. Well, what has happened? Netanyahu has consistently, I repeat, consistently violated ceasefire. Trump, of course, once said that he would order, quote unquote, order Israel to abide by it, but Netanyahu couldn't care less. So the point I wish to make is, in the equation between Netanyahu and Trump, as the saying goes, the tail is wagging the dog. Israel, the largest recipient of American military aid, diplomatic protection, Israel is dictating to America what its policy in the region should be. Let us remind ourselves that this has not been always the case, the tail wagging the dog. In 1982, when Israel started bombing Beirut, Menachem Begin was the prime minister. The president of the United States was Reagan. He got onto the phone and asked Begin, "Why are you committing the Holocaust?" Well, Begin was scandalized because his own family had died in the Holocaust. But Reagan continued, "I want you to stop it. Stop it now." Well, within 10 minutes, the Israeli cabinet met and they stopped. So that is the story. Now, why is Trump so beholden to Netanyahu? Well, I have a theory, but it's only a theory because I have no evidence. And the theory or the hypothesis, and that is that we all know about the Epstein files. Well, if you really look at the Epstein operations, it is clear that most probably a foreign intelligence agency was behind it. If so, it is possible that it was Mossad. If so, Mossad has a full file, just as the Department of Justice in the United States has. And that department has been releasing the file most reluctantly under pressure from the Congress. and with redactions. Now, the problem with redactions is that, when you redact something, there is a trace that you have redacted it. Now, there are portions in the file which might embarrass Trump if, this is only a hypothesis, the Mossad has the technology to delete without leaving a trace. Well, that will be a big thing for Trump. So the question is, in plain English, has Trump been blackmailed by Netanyahu? We do not know the answer, but we have reason to suspect. Now, let us move on to another. And that is, America is celebrating its 250th anniversary. July the 4th, 1776. Well, in any democracy, as King Charles reminded the Congress the other day, the executive power there have to be balance and checks. Now, let's expand a little on that. That doctrine was first initiated by Montesquieu, 17th century, early 18th century, French philosopher. He said that the state has three organs: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. And these three organs should not encroach upon the territory of the other. Neither of them should encroach. And that if any such encroachment takes place, well, there should be correction. In other words, if the executive exceeds its powers, like, declaring war without taking consent from the Congress, imposing tariffs the rest of the world without consulting or without getting the consent from the Congress, then the presidency should be checked by the other two. Now, in the case of tariffs, the Supreme Court did check Trump, but after such a long delay, and that too in such a, manner which is not exactly clear, because now Trump is likely to resort to other rules and legislation pieces to do the same thing. So the judiciary is weak. Now the legislative, well, it's even weaker because the Republican Party has the majority in the House as well as in the Senate. But the other day, in the Senate, a Democratic Party resolution to restrain Trump was defeated 214 to 213. And that too with the one Democrat voting against the resolution and a Republican voting for. So it's rather thin. So let me put it this way. Since the midterms are approaching, unless Trump changes course, he will be approaching his Waterloo. Now let us look at the rest of the international community. Because just as the Montesquieu doctrine applies to any state, it should also apply to the international community. When a member state of the United Nations does something wrong, it is for the rest of the international community to take whatever action that is necessary to correct that member state. Now, of course, though United Nations article says that all member states are, there is sovereign equality, but we know that no real equality. So let us look at those who matter or should matter. Look at European Union plus UK. What have they done? Well, they did not join the war, but they have not come out with a strong position. They have failed to show moral clarity. because attacking Iran while diplomatic negotiations were going on, while such negotiations were reaching a conclusion that was satisfactory to both sides, especially to Trump. In fact, the Omani foreign minister who mediated the talks at the Omani embassy in Geneva on the 27th of February, he later came to Washington and briefed Vice President Vance. And the gist is that the two sides had agreed and that technical experts were due to meet in Vienna with the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, on technical matters, because these two, Steve Witkoff and Kushner, they are innocent of safeguards and other technical matters, nuclear safeguards and other technical matters. Now, on the 28th, when the attack occurred, the Omani foreign minister went on air. There is a famous program, Face the Nation, and there he said in so many words that Iran had agreed to zero enrichment. I repeat, zero enrichment, zero stockpiling. Third, downblending the enriched uranium. It has about 440 or 450 kg. And last but not the least, Iran shall never ever seek a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran had agreed to all that, and Trump was getting a deal better than Obama's. Though I should say that if the goal is to prevent Iran from making a weapon, Obama deal was absolutely good, because since IAEA had full access to Iran's nuclear operations, there was no question of Iran's making a bomb. Iran has also signed the NPT. So that deal was good enough. Now, Trump, as candidate in 2016, said that it was a very foolish deed and all that. That is because at one point he was about to lose and he was going to withdraw. Then a man called Steve Bannon went to him and said, no, I have got a recipe for success. And that recipe included attacking the Obama deal. And that is how it happened. In other words, Trump walked out of a deal which took care of America's interests vis-a-vis this matter for personal reasons. In other words, we read in political science textbooks, national interest is the basis for decision-making in foreign policy. Well, it doesn't work that way. When it was Obama in the White House, it was in the national interest of the United States to have the JCPOA, Joint Common Plan of Action. When Trump came there, it was no longer. In other words, the national interest is often decided by the ruling establishment. And it is possible for that establishment to confuse between its own interest and the national interest. Now to come back, Trump could have then gone to town and told everyone that he had got a deal infinitely better than Obama's and that he was revoking sanctions, and his family business could have made a penny by doing business with the sanctions-free Iran. Why didn't he do that? Again, we have to go back to the equation between Netanyahu and Trump. So I will not say more about that. So the international community, including the European Union, Japan, Korea, BRICS, the Global South, have failed. China and Russia too have failed, but much less than others. At least they have come out with statements. In fact, the Chinese have said it is the law of the jungle that Trump has resorted to. And President Putin also has spoken out. Now, let me make the last point. India's position. Well, the Prime Minister Modi was there 2 days before. Now, when he landed there at the Ben Gurion International Airport, there were 8 super tankers there. Super tankers are for refueling mid-air. Well, 8 of them at the airport. And 2 747 aircraft unmarked. Now, it is generally known that an unmarked aircraft is used to transport embassy personnel or embassy goods. And naturally, the super tankers are a preparation for war. Now, we do not know whether Prime Minister Modi was told by Prime Minister Netanyahu about his plans. He may have or he may not have, because it is too sensitive, so he may not have. But Prime Minister Modi did pledge support for Israel. And he said, I'm quoting him, India stands with Israel firmly, with full conviction in this moment and beyond. In this moment and beyond. Why did he use the last word beyond? Was he anticipating something more? And a little more. What was happening? He said, in this moment, what is happening? Israel had committed a genocide in Gaza. Of course, there was sort of a ceasefire, but Israel was continuing the genocide by not permitting humanitarian material to reach the people of Gaza. Israel was encroaching or continuing with encroachment in the West Bank. In other words, Israel was violating international law. And so in this moment, quote unquote, when Israel was violating the international law, the Indian Prime Minister is expressing his firm support. Rather enigmatic, isn't it? Now, the last point, sorry for this, is that on the one hand, Government of India, especially the Petroleum and Natural Gas Minister, H.S. Puri, has said, we have no problem, we have taken care of everything. We have enough petrol, we have got natural gas, there will be no problem. Now, his statement was there in today's newspapers, say the Indian Express. The same newspaper on the same page carried another story that the price of the LPG cylinder commercial use had gone up by almost 1,300 rupees, and that the menu prices will go up by 5 to 20%, and that some eateries might be closing down, and that there was fear of job losses. In other words, why can't the Government of India share with us with some transparency what is happening? Then, it is not Government of India's fault that there is shortage, because it is because of international events. And the government has done its best, because I myself, had faced a situation in 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait. But, at that time I was on the board of the IOC, Indian Oil Corporation. And we used to meet and make spot purchases. So the government has done its best. And nothing is wrong with what the government has done. What is wrong is with government statements. Because when you say something which is not credible, when you say something which is true, that may not be believed by the people. Let me stop here. Thank you.